My name is Isolde Navarro, and the night my life shifted started with a simple notification. I was halfway through editing a client's brochure on my laptop, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet of my apartment, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was the family group chat, usually a stream of forwarded prayers, recipes, and my aunt's endless chain messages. This time it was from my cousin, Elena. Isolde, look what I found on the town history page, grinning squinting face, you were so cute. There was a link to a local Facebook group. I sighed, tapped it, expecting some blurry school photo or a parade float. The screen loaded a grainy, sun-washed photograph from decades ago, a neighborhood street party. Plastic folding tables, a crooked banner, kids with sticky hands running around. And in the center of it, my mother. She was younger, of course. Hair darker, pulled into a high ponytail. She was holding a baby on her hip, beaming at the camera, one hand raised in mid-wave. A man's arm, my father's arm, curled around her waist from the side of the frame. The comments were what made my stomach tighten. Look at your firstborn, Rosa, she was adorable. Can't believe how grown up she must be now. Time flies, doesn't it? Your eldest and then that other little one. You were always such a good mom. Eldest. My thumb hovered over the screen. My chest felt suddenly hollow, as if the air had been scooped out. I was an only child. I had been an only child for 33 years. I pinched to zoom in. The baby's face blurred, then sharpened slightly. Chubby cheeks, soft curls, a tiny fist clutching the neckline of my mother's floral dress. On the baby's wrist, there was a hospital bracelet, just barely visible, turned toward the camera enough that I could make out a few letters and numbers. It wasn't my name. I pulled the phone closer, my pulse slow but heavy in my ears. The caption under the photo read, Summer Block Party, 1993. Rosa and her first baby. Such sweet memories. I was born in December 1993. Winter. Snow. At least, that's how they'd always told the story. Outside, a car rolled past, its headlights passing through the thin curtains, sliding across the walls like a quiet searchlight. I sat in that moving rectangle of light and read the comments again, each word pressing down harder. Firstborn. Eldest. That other little one. My fingers moved on their own. I clicked on the profile of the woman who posted the photo, Marta, admin. My heart drummed once, low, solid. I scrolled through the rest of her uploads, eyes hunting for familiar faces, some sign that this was all just a misunderstanding, an unfortunate choice of words. But with each photo that appeared, the feeling grew stronger, heavier. There were more images of my parents, younger and laughing, and there was that baby again. Sometimes in my mother's arms. Sometimes sitting on my father's shoulders. Sometimes standing wobbly-legged next to a cake that had a large number 1 candle on top. In every frame, I was missing. Or maybe it was the other way around. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I just sat there, the quiet of the room wrapping around me as the refrigerator hummed, a siren wailed faintly in the distance, and an old photograph on a glowing screen told me something my family had never dared to say out loud. They had a child before me. And for some reason, they had erased her. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, the dim orange glow from the street lamp slipping through the curtains and casting thin bars of light across the room. By morning, I had gone through every story my parents had ever told me about my childhood. How my mother said I was her little miracle, barely breathing when I was born. How my father swore he cried when he first held me. How they always joked that they were too tired and too broke to have more children. None of those stories mentioned an older child. The more I thought about it, the more small details floated up. The locked wooden chest in my parents' bedroom that I'd never been allowed to open. The way my mother always went quiet around babies, her fingers tightening on the handle of her purse. The time I'd asked her if she ever wanted another child, and she'd said, "No, one is enough," in a voice that sounded more like, "One is all that's left." By mid-morning, I was sitting on their front steps, my car still ticking heat into the winter air. The familiar cracks in the driveway stared up at me. I had grown up in this house, running between those garden beds, biking over that same uneven concrete. It all looked unchanged, but I felt like I was walking into a stranger's home. My mother opened the door before I could knock, her cardigan pulled tight around her. "Isolde. You didn't say you were coming." "I needed to talk," I said, calm, my voice almost level. "Can I come in?" Her eyes searched my face, looking for something, anger, maybe, or tears. When she didn't find it, she stepped aside. The house smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. The clock in the hallway ticked softly. On the wall were the same framed photos I'd seen all my life, my school pictures, graduation, me holding my university diploma with my parents on either side. "I saw something last night," I began, sitting at the kitchen table. The sunlight came in pale through the window, catching the steam from the coffee machine. On the town history page. An old photo of you and Dad. Her hand stilled on the mug she was rinsing. The ceramic tapped lightly against the sink. "With a baby," I added. "A baby everyone called your firstborn." The kitchen went very quiet. The only sound was water running over porcelain. Then she turned off the tap and dried her hands slowly, methodically, folding the towel in half. "We can talk about this with your father," she said finally, not looking at me. "He'll be home for lunch." "I'm asking you," I replied. "Were there children before me?" Her shoulders rose and fell. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer, that she would change the subject, insist it was a cousin or a babysitting job. Instead, she said, still facing the sink, "Some things are better left in the past, Isolde. Better left in the past." But the past wasn't staying put. It was leaking out through old photos and careless comments, spreading across the internet where anyone could see. Including me. "You know I help run the cafe now," I said, leaning back, studying her profile. "You and Dad are talking about putting my name on the papers. If there's something I don't know, and it affects the family, the business, anything, I need to know before I sign anything." There it was, the second heart of this secret, not just family, but money, property, the future. My parents owned our little corner cafe outright, plus this house. They had always said it would all go to me someday. But what if I wasn't the only me they had? Her lips trembled, almost imperceptibly. "Nothing you saw changes how we feel about you," she said softly. "You are our daughter." "That's not what I asked." She flinched at the edge of truth in my tone, even though I hadn't raised my voice. We sat there, mother and daughter, the ticking clock marking out each second that passed without an answer. By the time my father came home, my question was a shadow in every room. He set down his keys, kissed my mother on the cheek, then looked at me with wary eyes. "We should have told you ourselves," he said, even before I asked. But there was so much to lose. And that was when I realized this wasn't just about love or guilt. This was about something they believed could be taken away, reputation, maybe. The cafe. The house. The comfortable life built on a story with missing chapters. If I kept pushing, I might lose the parents I thought I knew. If I didn't, I might lose myself. The official version I got that day was thin, like a sheet stretched over furniture to keep the dust off. My parents admitted, in halting phrases, that there had been a situation before I was born. A pregnancy they weren't ready for. A child who was very sick. A loss that nearly destroyed them. Their eyes glossed over specifics, skated past names, dates, anything that could be held and examined. It was complicated, my father kept saying, as if that explained everything. The past doesn't change who you are today. But it did change something. It changed the way their every pause sounded like omission and every gesture felt like deflection. That night, my Aunt Elena called. "I saw your messages in the group," she said. "Rosa looked like she'd seen a ghost today. You pushed her, didn't you?" I asked for the truth. On the other end of the line, I heard a soft exhale. "Your mother and I promised your grandfather we would keep quiet." Grandfather. He had passed away when I was 19, leaving me his old guitar and a few vague stories about his youth. He had never mentioned a first grandchild. "Elena," I said slowly. "Was there another child? A sister?" Silence stretched between us, thin and brittle. Finally, she said, "I can't tell you everything. But your grandfather left something. He kept it in a deposit box. I was there when he rented it." She hesitated. "He wrote your name on the contact card." My pulse quickened. "Do you know where?" She told me the bank's name, the branch, the last 4 digits of the box number. "If it's still there, you'll need some proof you're his granddaughter. And, look in your grandmother's sewing basket. He hid some things there. Old habits. He trusted compartments." The next morning, pale light washed the streets clean. I drove to my parents' house while they were at the cafe and let myself in. The house creaked and settled around me, familiar but less welcoming now. Grandma's sewing basket sat on the living room shelf, just where it always had. The woven lid squeaked softly when I opened it, releasing the faint smell of dust and lavender. Spools of thread, old needles, a yellowed measuring tape. And at the bottom, under a folded scrap of lace, a small metal key taped to an index card with my grandfather's handwriting. Box 317. Isolde. My hands were steady as I peeled the tape away. The bank lobby was cool and quiet, lit by sun diffused through frosted glass. The woman at the counter took my ID, checked the records, and nodded. "Yes, Miss Navarro. Box 317 is active." She lowered her voice. "Your grandfather listed you as the successor. I'm sorry for your loss, even if it's been some time." In the vault, the air felt thicker. Rows of boxes lined the walls like metallic book spines. The clerk slid box 317 out and placed it on a narrow table, then stepped back. "I'll give you some privacy." The box was heavier than I expected. Inside, there wasn't much, just a manila envelope and a folded piece of paper. My fingers brushed the edges, like touching the outline of something buried. I opened the envelope first. There it was. The same photograph from the Facebook page, but clearer, richer. My mother, younger, her smile big enough to light the whole frame. My father beside her. And the baby between them, held securely, cheeks full and eyes wide. On the back of the photograph, in my grandfather's precise printing, were words that made my breath catch. Lucia's first street party. June 1993. Our first grandchild. Lucia. Not a cousin. Not a neighbor's child. Lucia, with my mother's eyes and my father's chin. My sister. Underneath the photo were 3 folded documents. The first was a hospital discharge form. Rosa Navarro, patient. Infant, Lucia Navarro. Discharged in good condition. The second was a handwritten letter from my grandfather, dated 5 years before his death. "My dear Isolde," it began, in ink that had faded at the edges. "If you are reading this, I have left this world with a weight still on my chest. You must know that you were never second best, never a replacement. But you were not the first." He wrote about Lucia, born in June, not December. He described her as a quiet baby, fond of grasping his finger, of listening to the sound of his old radio. He wrote about a winter when everything went wrong, a severe fever, a rushed trip to the hospital, a night that ended with doctors shaking their heads and a mother collapsing in on herself. "Your parents broke," he wrote. "They were not ready to face such grief. When you came 6 months later, a surprise, a miracle, they clung to you so tightly they pretended there had never been another. They believed that to speak Lucia's name would shatter you, and themselves." The third document was a contract. Not a legal adoption, but a notarized agreement, signed by my parents and my grandparents, listing a small savings account for the benefit of any living child of Rosa and Daniel Navarro, including but not limited to Lucia and Isolde. The signature lines from my parents were firm. The account number was written twice. At the bottom, in my grandfather's hand, was one more note. "I fear the money meant for both of you has been touched by others. If something happens to me, look for it. Ask questions. Protect what is yours and what should have been Lucia's." My hands shook then, but not from rage. It was something cooler, heavier, settling into my bones. They hadn't just buried my sister's memory. Someone had buried her share of the future, too. I didn't confront my parents that night. Instead, I went home with the documents tucked carefully back into the envelope and placed it on my kitchen table, where the late afternoon light turned the paper edges gold. I ran my fingers over the hospital form, the notarized agreement, my grandfather's letter. Each one was a piece of a puzzle my family had tried to sweep under the rug. Lucia, born in June. Gone by winter. A savings account meant for both of us. A warning that others might have touched it. My mind went immediately to my uncle Javier, my father's older brother, who had suddenly expanded his small construction business around the time my grandfather began to look tighter around the eyes, softer in the shoulders. The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Her office smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Sunlight filtered through blinds, striping the desk. She listened quietly as I laid the documents out between us. "You're not here to sue your parents," she said, after reading everything twice. "No," I said. "They're guilty of silence. Of cowardice, maybe. But they also lost a child. I don't want to punish them for that." Her gaze moved from the letter to the contract. "You're here because of this." "Yes." My grandfather believed the savings account meant for his grandchildren was misused. "I want to know if that's true. And if there's anything left for Lucia. Even if all that remains is the truth on paper." She leaned back, her chair creaking softly. "We can trace the account. See where the funds went. If someone moved the money without proper authorization, there may be grounds for legal action. Against my uncle," I said calmly. "If he's involved." She studied me for a moment, as if expecting anger that never surfaced. "Revenge?" she asked. "Correction," I replied. "He always acted like the family's backbone. If he built some of that on money meant for a dead child and her sister, I want that known. I want it fixed." Over the following weeks, everything moved in measured steps. The lawyer obtained records. We discovered that the original savings account had been drained slowly over several years, the transfers authorized by my grandfather when he was already on strong medication, his signature shakier each time. The destination: an account owned by Navarro Construction, my uncle's company. When confronted with the data, my uncle sent a long email to my parents, full of rationalizations. He wrote that the money had been lent to him to save the business. That he had intended to pay it back. That my grandfather had understood the needs of the living, and that Lucia was with God. He never mentioned me. My lawyer suggested a civil suit. "We have enough to make this very public," she said. "The court of opinion may do more damage than the court of law." But I had something else in mind. I asked my parents to host a family dinner to talk about the cafe's future. They agreed, relieved, I think, to be focusing on something practical again. My uncle and aunt came, dressed like it was a holiday, my uncle in his best blazer, my aunt with her hair set in careful waves. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary. Glasses clinked softly as everyone took their seats. My mother had set the table with the good plates, the ones with the fading gold rim. Before we talk about the cafe, I said, standing at my chair, I'd like to show you something. I placed the photograph of Lucia in the center of the table. My mother's fork slipped from her hand, clattering against porcelain. My father's jaw tightened. My uncle's eyes flicked from the image to me, then back again. This is your first grandchild, I said to my uncle. I kept my voice even, tempered. And your niece. Her name was Lucia. Grandpa wrote it on the back. I passed the photograph to him, then the letter, then the contract. As the papers moved around the table, the room filled with the sound of rustling pages and shallow breaths. I spoke with a lawyer, I continued. We traced the savings account meant for both of us. It went into your business, Uncle Javier. You never paid it back. A muscle twitched in his cheek. We were all struggling then, he said, his voice low. Your grandfather gave his blessing. He knew the company would support all of us. Including you. But not Lucia, I said. Not the memory of her. Her share became concrete and scaffolding and new trucks. No grave. No scholarship in her name. Nothing. My aunt reached for his arm. Isolde, darling, you're upset. Money can't bring back. I'm not asking for her back, I said gently. I'm asking for recognition. And restitution. I slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposal, drafted by my lawyer. It outlined a repayment plan into a new trust, in Lucia's name, to fund medical care or education for children in the neighborhood. It also included a clause, if he refused, we would proceed with legal action and public filings. My uncle stared at the folder as if it might bite. You would go to court against your own family? He asked finally. I'm trying not to, I said. That's why this is here, on this table, and not on a judge's desk. Grandpa believed in compartments, but he also believed in fairness. This is the only way I can see to make any of this fair. Around us, the house was still. The ticking clock in the hallway, the soft hiss of the radiator, the faint traffic outside, they all seemed to recede as my uncle's eyes moved slowly over the documents, his face pinched, aging in front of me. I'll review it, he said at last. With my lawyer. Of course, I replied. But remember, this isn't revenge, Uncle. This is the bill for a debt that's been quietly accruing interest for 32 years. No one raised their voice. No one stormed out. We simply sat there, a family rearranging itself around a truth that had finally been placed in the center of the table, like an extra plate set for someone who was no longer there. The settlement took months. My uncle's lawyer tried to push back, of course, making careful arguments about implied consent and family understanding. But the paper trail we had gathered, combined with the clear terms of the original agreement, gave our side weight. In the end, my uncle agreed to repay a substantial portion of the misused funds into a newly created Lucia Navarro Memorial Trust. The trust's purpose was simple: to provide financial support for children in the community facing medical crises, children whose parents sat in hospital hallways like my mother once had, counting the tiles and praying. When the documents were signed, my lawyer slid my copy toward me. The ink was still drying. I ran my fingers along the bold letters of Lucia's name. How do you feel? She asked. Like a ledger just balanced, I said. Not perfectly. But close enough that I can live with it. My parents were quieter after everything, in a different way than before. The silence between us changed shape. It wasn't heavy with denial anymore, just careful. We began to talk about Lucia more openly, at first in small fragments. She loved the sound of the washing machine, my mother told me one afternoon, her eyes on the window, watching rain streak down the glass. She would stop crying whenever it started. I used to joke that we should put her crib in the laundry room. She had my ears, my father said later, tapping his own. You do too. I see it now. We didn't say everything. Some parts of grief are too private to lay out under bright lights. But we said enough. One evening, my mother brought out a shoebox from the back of her closet. Inside were a few photos I hadn't seen, tucked away where even a curious child wouldn't have found them. The edges were soft, the color slightly faded. In one, my parents sat on the couch, a baby balanced between them. Lucia's eyes were serious, curious, as if she was already cataloging the world. In another, she was sleeping on my grandfather's chest, his hand gently cupped over her back. Why didn't you tell me? I asked quietly, tracing the outline of my sister's cheek with my gaze. My mother's voice was barely above a whisper. We thought if we never said her name, we could keep the pain from touching you. We thought we were protecting you. And did it work? I asked. She exhaled slowly. No. It just meant you had to meet the pain alone, and later, and without any of the love that came before it. There it was. Not an excuse, but a truth. Flawed, human, like everything else in our family. I moved into a small apartment above the cafe a few months later. It wasn't a dramatic estrangement, it was space. A new floor between my life and my parents, a little distance for all of us to breathe. The first thing I hung on the wall was a framed copy of that original photograph from the deposit box. Not the cropped version my mother had once kept. The full image, with the background clutter and the crooked banner and the hospital bracelet glinting on Lucia's wrist. I chose a simple black frame, matte glass that didn't shine too much under the overhead light. In the evenings, when I finished balancing the cafe's books or closing out the register, I would climb the narrow stairs, unlock my door, and be greeted by that captured summer. My mother's younger smile. My father's proud posture. My sister's round, steady gaze. She wasn't a ghost anymore, unnamed and hidden. She was a fact. A person who had existed, loved and briefly held and then lost. A part of our story that had been in the dark for decades and was now, finally, allowed to sit in the light. Sometimes I stood in front of the photograph and imagined the life we might have had together. Two sisters working the cafe, rolling our eyes at the same jokes, arguing over recipes, tagging each other in embarrassing throwback posts. I didn't linger long in those fantasies. I let them pass through me like a breeze, gentle and cool. What mattered more was what came next. The trust began to help families. My uncle, perhaps out of guilt or perhaps because he saw no other path, started donating his time and resources to the fund's events. My parents attended counseling, together and separately. They didn't become new people overnight, but they became more honest versions of themselves. And me? I learned that truth doesn't always scream its arrival. Sometimes it surfaces quietly, in an old photo uploaded to a forgotten Facebook group, in a letter waiting in a narrow metal box. Sometimes revenge isn't fire and broken glass, but carefully arranged documents and a settlement signed in ink. On quiet nights, the cafe below me settles, the pipes ticking softly as they cool. Streetlights paint faint rectangles on my floor. I look up at Lucia's picture and feel something like peace. Not because justice was perfect. Not because the past stopped hurting. But because I chose to stop participating in the lie. I chose to bring her back into the story, not as a whispered regret, but as a name on a frame, a trust, a line in our family history that could no longer be erased. The truth was always there, embedded in silver grains on old paper, waiting. All I did was hold it steady in the light and refuse to look away.